Hey friends, today I'll be talking with Chris Denelle, who is an attorney with Denelle Law, and we're going to be discussing inspections. So Chris, we're going to be talking about inspections.
Awesome.
I think a lot of people's favorite topics. So in this market where it's extremely competitive and it does come down to the dollars, but it also comes down to the terms, what are some issues that you see coming up with people either removing their due diligence and not doing inspections, or after the fact inspection problems?
Yeah. So obviously the market right now is hyper competitive. There's a lack of inventory. Buyers want to get their offers accepted. It's difficult. That's the bottom line. So you see a lot of folks out there that are waiving inspections or having an inspection and they don't have problems fixed. One of the bigger items that we have is when folks waive inspections, they get in the property and post-closing. The next morning after a big rainstorm, they have inches of water in their basement. It may not have been disclosed, or it was disclosed incorrectly, and I get a phone call whenever it rains really heavy one night, and I've had a bunch of closings the day before, the Friday before. Usually there's a pretty good chance I may get a call about this. Now, if you didn't have inspections, it's difficult because the general rule is buyer beware. And if you don't have inspections, it's really tough to go back and prove that case. It's expensive. You have to get litigation attorneys involved. Attorneys are expensive, folks. They are. That's the bottom line.
By then, they might as well just pay for it themselves, because like we have attorneys that have a retainer, right? That need, in order to be able to service you, you have to pay them up front with no guarantee.
Right.
So with that being said, I'm going to tell you some of the inspection alterations that I've given to my clients as an option, and you can tell me is this attorney approved or not.
Attorney approved or not. All right, I like it. So
I don't usually encourage my clients to waive a home inspection unless they're a contractor, unless they have multiple properties. They're very savvy and they understand the full implications of what could happen if something like that post-close happened with water in the basement and stuff. They're fully accepting that they're waiving that.
Right.
And Connecticut actually has a inspection waiver form that kind of takes the burden off of us, that if like they're saying, I fully understand what I am doing by waiving a home inspection.
Yeah.
Because I never want to see somebody make a decision out of haste or just because they want something, and then in the end it turns around to bite them.
Right.
So I don't recommend to waive a home inspection, but unless they're very, very comfortable. But I would say, let's make some different terms within the inspection period. So I recently did one where we took the inspection period, brought it down from 10 days to just 5 days.
Yeah.
I contacted my home inspector ahead of time and said, hey, I'm going to need this done within 5 days. Is it realistic? He said, yes, he's going to squeeze me in. The other thing we did was an inspection threshold, which means that my clients agreed that they were going to do their inspection, but they weren't going to ask for any repairs unless a single defect was over $5,000.
Yeah.
Agree? Disagree?
I agree with both of them, right? So if you're just drawing the period back, if you make sure you have all the parties on the same page, i.e. the inspector, right, it does make your offer more attractive, right? So that's good for you to get your offer accepted. And if necessary, if you're negotiating inspection repairs, you can always either opt out of the contract if there's major issues and you can't come to an agreement, or you can extend at that point. So that's a good one. We like that one. And the other one, where if it has to amount to essentially a major repair, i.e. something over $5,000, something over $10,000, so that way the seller is not being what they perceive as nickel and dimed.
Right.
That's just fine too. So we just need to make sure, if you're a first-time home buyer, someone that hasn't owned a home before, hey, if this pops up, this could be $2,000, right? So if you need new electrical service, just know you can't get out of the contract. So it's just, it always comes down to disclosure. So it definitely makes the offer more attractive, which is what we're looking for, right? And it also provides us with kind of the warm and fuzzies that we need to make sure that, hey, if something pops up, we know that we don't have to get into a lemon of a house. So those are good options. Those are definitely good options, as opposed to just outright waiving inspections, which can be really difficult unless you have that really experienced buyer.
Okay. Good. And the other thing I just wanted to talk about, because when we talk about the repair walkthrough,
Yeah.
and sometimes the repair walkthrough, depending on the timing of the repairs, and the final walkthrough happen on the same day.
Yeah.
And the buyers do have the right to bring in their home inspector, which seldom they have, because usually you can see if the repair was done with
Right.
like the naked eye. But for ones that are a little bit more involved with like plumbing and electrical, stuff like that, we would bring in our home inspector to re-inspect
Yeah.
for an abbreviated price. What are some of the things that typically come up during a walkthrough or a repair walkthrough?
Yeah.
And what are some of the remedies to those situations?
Right, so you're entitled to that walkthrough to ensure either the repairs are done correctly, or if it's just your normal walkthrough to make sure it's in the same condition, the property that is, as it was at the time of inspection, reasonable wear and tear being accepted. So if there is something off, then you really have a contingency built in there. So at that point, we would have to discuss with the seller exactly how we're going to work this out. Or if we're the seller, then we'll discuss with the buyer how we're going to work this out. Can we get it done quickly? You know, when you have good realtors that have good connections, such as yourself, typically you have a Rolodex of people that you can call and say, hey, what is this going to cost? What are we looking at here? How long before we can get it done? You know, in some scenarios, you may even hold back some funds from the seller if you need to get it closed out, hold an escrow. Okay, it's not the ideal scenario because then you have items, it's not a clean break from the seller into the buyer, but it is an option. And I mean, that's a pretty common thing in the winter. If, for instance, there's like a new septic, all right, and they can't get it done because the ground is frozen, okay? So after closing, when the ground thaws, then they can put that in. So you hold the funds back in escrow. Typically it's like 150% of the cost, so that way you can make sure buyer's protected,
Yeah.
seller gets it paid out, and then they get the excess funds returned back to them. Hopefully everyone's happy. It doesn't always work out that way 100%, but it's a better option than having to completely terminate the contract, right?
And I think a couple other options that I've experienced with you is we either push the closing,
Yeah.
you know, if that's not gonna cause havoc on everybody's world with movers and everything
Yeah,
else, but
right.
we could push the closing by a day or two or the following week to give the seller a little bit more time.
Right.
And then also maybe a seller credit.
Yeah.
So to just wrap it up, the seller doesn't have the means or the time, no one has the time to push a closing or to
Right.
wait for the job to be done now. So let's just give whatever we think this is gonna cost and wrap it up and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, both of those are really good options, right? So long as it's not going to throw a wrench into everyone's lives, right? So pushing back closing, awesome, all right? So then we can actually wrap it up, do the closing a little bit later, so long as it doesn't wreak havoc on the deal. And then we have that clean break again, which is what everyone is looking for. And what was the other one that you said again?
The closing costs.
Closing cost credit.
concession?
Yeah, so also a good one, right? Because as long as the buyer's aware of what we're looking at as far as the cost of the repair and the seller's on board, we still have that clean break, right? And then the buyer can actually go ahead and hire the contractor kind of their choosing, which is also a
Right,
good
handle
thing.
it themselves.
Right, and that
Yeah.
way everything is wrapped up and they get exactly what they're looking for. It's their contractor. They don't have to worry about going with the cheapest, which may happen if the seller hires the contractor, right? So both of those are good options if it works for that transaction, really.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah,
That's all
thanks for
good
having me.
stuff. So
Appreciate
if you
it.
have any more questions, feel free to DM us on Instagram and we'll be happy to answer those for you.